Oh, the Friday before the semester starts. It's
Right, well, at least
almost,
it's Friday before a long weekend.
it is the long weekend, but it's always, right before the semester starts, it's always a lot of stuff. So this has been a tough week for both of us.
Yeah, it's been a really tough week for both of us. So this is good. We can have a conversation about triathlon and not think about work and injuries
That's right. That's
well,
right.
we're gonna talk about injuries and I'm injured.
Well, and I think this is good because I think people should know before we push start on this, we did
Yeah,
say, wait, should we even do this tonight? And both of us said, yeah, we should because we want to talk about what we really enjoy.
yeah.
And that's important because I think that's what training is all about. I mean, there are times where you do have to go get through those tough days, but there's times that you got to also say, not today. And I think that's the hard part of training for endurance events is knowing when to push and when not to push. But yeah, we both had injuries, and do you want to
Mhm.
talk about where?
Yeah, John, you're right. And the thing that's really hard to wrap your head around, especially in triathlon, is how do you really excel in three sports
Mhm.
and do it safely and do it in a way you don't get injured? And one of the articles that we looked at, I mean, depending on what study you look at, it's something like 90% of triathletes get hurt
Yep.
every year. In an 8-week block, it was like 35%
Mhm.
of triathletes get injured.
Yep.
And so then you have to take a step back and number one, accept that if you're going to be probably racing at the highest level,
Mhm.
the chances are pretty good you're going to get injured.
Yep.
And it was interesting during the COVID time when we weren't actually racing, I was still training pretty hard.
Yep.
I didn't get injured.
Yeah, that's right. You did. I am really impressed with the amount of training you did, and you bent, but you never broke.
Yeah. Well, and the weird thing is because I wasn't trying to like peak for something.
Hmm.
The Everesting was, was a peak, but biking's a little bit different, I think. And
Right.
but yeah, and it is interesting, right? Like if you're not trying to increase, because really peaking is about increasing load.
Right.
And the problem is in triathlon, oftentimes the fitter you feel, the more you think you can do,
Hmm.
right?
That's right.
And so load management, I think, honestly, is one, and we've talked about load management before, but it truly is like, I think it's the most important thing in triathlon. Like,
Hmm.
and I know we've talked about a lot of like, oh, this is
Yep.
important, but I don't think there's anything more important because, well, then this will take us back to consistency, right? If you get injured, you can't be consistent,
Hmm.
and you get sick, you can't be consistent.
Hmm.
So yeah, load management is interesting, and I've talked to a lot of coaches and people that coach single sport athletes,
Hmm.
and their load management is way easy,
Hmm.
right? So the cross country coach at UNLV, or some of the past cross country coaches at UNLV, I've talked a lot about it with them, and they're like, okay, the girls are going to do like 60 to maybe 100 miles a week running. Okay, and then you start looking at their load management. Well, and then they get this day off and this off, and and this easy run and this easy run. I'm like, okay, there's triathletes that are doing 60 miles a week running and biking 250 miles and running 20 or swimming 20K.
Hmm.
How do you actually manage that load?
Hmm.
um it's to me, this is truly the mystery of being a successful triathlete. And we've talked about this last week. You and I together have been in the game a long time,
Yep.
and we both suffered through many injuries.
Yeah, that's right.
And 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 we're also fairly well educated in this area, so it's even more frustrating. Like we seem to know what to do,
Hmm.
um but it still happens. And I
It
and I
does.
and I contended it, especially as you get older, doing three sports at a high level is somewhat, and I hate to say this because I love triathlon, it's a recipe for disaster.
Yep. Yep. Well, go back to what you started with in terms of expect an injury when you're training, because for cyclists, we always said that there's two kinds of cyclists: those who have crashed and those who are going to.
Yep.
And for running, I think it's three types of runners. Either you're recovering from an injury, or you have an injury, or you're soon to be injured. And so it just speaks to the nature of endurance events, is that there's a high risk of overuse injury.
Yeah. Well, and I'll put it even a step further, and it's the combination of stress, right?
Mm-hmm.
So most people on a weekend in triathlon, and most coaches would say, okay, you get your long run on one day and your long bike on another day, and you fit a swim in.
Mm-hmm.
And the weird thing is that many of the coaches I've talked to and worked with throughout the years, then you do that, and then Monday is the start of a new week.
Yeah, right.
And guess what? On Monday, well, the last week is gone.
Mm-hmm.
So we start again. So it's like, okay, now it's an easy ride or easy run on Monday, but your body doesn't know it's Monday.
Yeah, right.
Your body just knows you beat me up this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that's important to understand. And then also understanding like what fatigue does to our musculoskeletal system over time.
Mm-hmm.
And John, we talked about this before. You used to, I don't know what you're at now, you used to always take Mondays off.
Yeah.
Right. And I actually thought that was such a smart thing to do.
And now I'm not doing it.
Now you're not doing it. I was actually like, man, he's got that discipline to take Mondays off. And I even gave you more, I'll give you more credit, because not only did John take Mondays off, he had to go to Capriati's and have a huge sandwich at lunch and basically refuel himself.
That's right.
And so that being said, I think that, this is the dance, like trying to figure this out.
Well, and it's, the mystery is trying to quantify load, trying to define what load is, stress, because like we started off here, this was a tough week, not tough from a physical nature, but from, work nature. Okay, well, how do you factor that in with what we're going to do tomorrow for training, or Sunday and leading into the next week? So this is the secret sauce, is how do you get all this information? Well, one, how do you quantify it? How do you measure it? And then how do you process it? And some of the stuff that we're dealing with, you can't measure. You can't measure how, all the stress that they're dealing with, but yet you have to account for that when you're setting up your training program.
So let's add another term, and that's resiliency.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. So how resilient is your body?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a tricky thing. This is a really tricky thing, because everyone's body is different. Right. So the load, we talked about this a few weeks ago, the load that one person would get injured with, another person won't.
That's it.
And there's many factors that go into this. So if I was to advise somebody getting into triathlon, so they're just say, hey, Ted, I'd like to do my first triathlon. Can you help me out? What do I need to do? You have to look at that and say, well, what have you been doing for the last 10 years?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Oh, I work out at the gym 3 times a week. I do HIIT training. I've been weight training. Okay, that's one way to look at it, right? One person. Oh, I've been running, and that's all I've been doing is running. Mm-hmm. Another person. Oh, I actually have been doing nothing. Mm-hmm. I want to get into this because my friend at work is doing it, and I want to do it. So now all 3 of those people, their tissues are going to have different level of resiliency just because of what they've done the last 10 years. And then you take it a step further, then their genetics are also going to play a role, right? There is actually, I can't remember the last time I looked, I think there's 7 or 8 specific genes that go into encoding collagen synthesis in tendon and muscle. And unless you know what your genetic profile is and those specific genes, you don't know. Like, so, and we do know that like elite athletes tend to have those, basically the genes switched exactly the right way to be able to handle the high load. And so So then that being said, most people have no idea
Right.
about how resilient their tissues of their body are. Not even like the mental side, just like the absolute physical side.
Well, and to make it even more complicated, and we will try to simplify this, but to make
Yep.
it more complicated, there is no way to predict how anyone's going to respond to a particular training program right now. We just don't have that, a, a 2 mile run today, right now, is going to yield a different response than a 2 mile run a year ago or 2 years ago. And so, this is the tough part, is that it's really hard to predict uh, how someone will respond to training stimuli.
Yeah.
That's why we do all the measurements. That's why you have a coach. That's why you do a lot of reading. That's why you keep it logged. Because you're always trying to evaluate what's going on to be able to make adjustments. Sometimes those are big adjustments, and sometimes they're micro adjustments. But you're constantly doing this iterative process of setting up your training program, because it's so complicated to try to predict how to get someone to improve fitness.
Yep. And I'll be completely frank with this. Even if you have a coach and a really good coach who's paying attention,
Hmm.
you still will get injured.
Hmm.
Like that doesn't change anything, because when they look at this and they look at elite level athletes, so look at Jan Frodeno, for example, right? Gets that sacral stress fracture.
Yep.
He's got people monitoring everything he does,
Hmm.
right? It's not, it's not just having a quality coach. Like that helps, but you're still at risk.
Hmm.
And because once again, we're asking ourselves to do something that is not, in my opinion, not normal,
Right.
right? This is very, to do triathlon is abnormal.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So let's work towards some rules for
Some ways to do this.
progression. So last time we did rules for training progression, but we sort of started in a funny spot, talking
Yeah.
about making sure that your gear is ready, making sure you have your equipment right, you identify your key races, you identify those life commitments, those dates that you have: graduations, birthdays, anniversaries, reunions, vacations, whatever it is. Identify key work stress, just like the week before the semester starts. Predictable time sinks that you have. Identify the time in each day that you can incorporate training easily. And your training program should not add stress to the life of your significant other, spouse, boyfriend, friend, family, whatever it is. So
Yeah.
those were the rules we covered last week.
So now let's talk about specifically the rules for your body
Mm-hmm.
and how to handle that. So the first thing I always think about is kind of assessing yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, where are you? And not where were you at the end of last season? Like, where are you today?
Yep.
Have you been taking it easy for the last 2 or 3 months? Have you been training hard for the last 2 or 3 months and haven't taken a break? It was interesting. I was at my doctor a little while ago, and I said, "Oh, you're a triathlete. You must have a strong core."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Ideally."
Yeah.
And for someone my age coming to see you, yeah, I probably have a strong core.
Yep.
Like
Right. Right.
49-year-old male
Mm-hmm.
that comes in, the same doctor said that, by the way, that between 30 and 40% of his patients have some kind of metabolic syndrome. So
Okay.
like,
Right.
so you think about it, like, yeah, in comparison, I have a strong core, but I know in my heart of hearts, I need to have a stronger core.
Yeah. Right.
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 So, and be honest with yourself with that, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that's something that I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I don't, or I'm not running well right now. Right. And so I haven't been putting in the volume, or something's wrong with my form. Same with swimming, right? And it's actually identifying those things, in my opinion, is really, really important, to identify your faults and your weaknesses
Mm-hmm.
before you really dig deep into, like, okay, what am I going to do
Mm-hmm.
for training? And there, you've probably done this at work at some point, and most people have some kind of like a needs assessment. where you actually write, like literally write down, like, what are the things you need to be successful.
Right.
And I think that's, to me, that's always should always be the first step, is making those identifications of things you could do. Do you do stuff like that?
No, I don't specifically, but I don't do it consciously or with a plan, but I'm probably doing it on a regular basis. Like even, what I'm doing right now for my training, I know I took some time off, and so I'm not rushing into the training at all. And so I guess I'm doing that, but I'm just not doing it purposefully.
Yeah. Now, how about like noticing things that are areas of weakness for you?
Yeah, I did look at that specifically this last year because still having some hamstring problems that keep recurring. So I said, okay, I am going to do that strength training that we
Yeah.
recommend,
Yeah.
and so I've been going to the gym and doing some more work for the poster aspect of my
Yeah.
limbs mostly. So
Yeah, and I think that's super important for people, is to recognize that, because John, you could have not addressed that and just
mhm,
taken a bunch, taken some time off. It would have felt better, and
yeah,
slowly progressed back into what you wanted to do. And you'd been rolling. You're always rolling the dice as far as injury, but you're rolling loaded dice if
yeah,
you haven't addressed those things. I think that's critical, but I really think you need to take an honest assessment of
mhm,
yourself.
yeah,
And once again, it's not what you were, and it's not where you want to be. It's where am I today?
mhm, mhm,
And then and that's not even looking at metrics,
right,
right? And if you want to start looking at metrics, which I know we're going to get into, I think that's the next step,
mhm,
right? Um, some of the metrics I look at, and we've talked about this before as well, is like, okay, how many miles did I run last year? How many miles did I bike? How many miles did I swim? And this is the kind of first rule that I kind of go off of, is my goal for the year should not be more than 10% gain on any of those things for the
mhm,
year of
mhm,
total volume.
yeah,
And I've kind of tried to do that for a long time.
mhm,
Because I do in Strava, you can set your yearly goal.
yeah,
And I kind of like that, because it keeps you a little bit honest. But like in the beginning, I know in the beginning of the year, well, if my goal is last year my goal was to ride 9,000 miles.
great,
And so in the beginning of the year, I was riding quite a bit, and I was kind of on track for that. But if I needed to take some time off, I would allow it to kind of go. But I just kind of kept an eye on it.
yeah,
But my plan was to not go over.
right,
And you got to be really honest with yourself on that. And that's the greatest thing about like Strava or Garmin Connect or whatever, is you can actually go back and you
mhm,
can actually see what was my volume last year and the year before and the year before. And so that's one of the first things I try and set up with myself, is these are my yearly volume that I don't want to go over. But understanding as I build my training plan throughout the year, that there's gonna be highs and lows
yeah,
to that. And I think that's being honest with yourself,
mhm.
and it's being practical. Do you do something like that?
Yeah, I remember the story you're telling made me think back to when I signed up for the U.S. Postal Challenge as a remote long distance swim for the year goal, and I think it was 500 miles that I signed up for. And I'm like, yeah, I can do 500 miles. And then I got into January, February, and I kept looking at the online report, and it kept saying you're falling behind. And I'm like, falling behind. I'm swimming pretty good volume. So then I just sat down. I actually did the math, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I got a
I can
lot
do
of
that.
swim to do.
500 miles is a long way. If you think
It
about
was a long ways.
per
And so,
year, that's,
yeah. So I ended up having to swim like 3,000 yards every day for like a long period of time. It was
and that's
pretty
not
fun.
sustainable.
I did it, but I don't think I could go back and do that again. It was a pretty big time commitment.
So like that's more the macro, and then
Hmm.
obviously that's the big picture.
Hmm.
But you can divide things out from there. But then also, like, if we're going to build in towards something, and both you and I are planning on racing at Oceanside. I'm hopeful. And then on to the full at St. George. It's interesting, both of us have the same couple
Yeah,
races,
that's right. Yeah.
which is it's actually unusual for us.
No, it is. Yeah.
But then being realistic, like, okay, in the last 4-6 weeks, how much have I ran? How much have I swam? How much have I biked? And then it's coming up with a metric for that. And, I know there's it's a pretty common thing with this one is 10% per week. You don't want to increase your volume more than 10% per week. I would actually say it'd be better to use some kind of like moving average. To take the average of your last 4 weeks, and then the next week, don't increase more than 10% from that 4-week average.
Yeah.
I don't know if you do something like that.
I do, but I don't have a number in mind. I look back over my training history and I can see sort of what I can handle for a ramp up, if you will. But I do need to be careful because the tendency is to want to try to ramp up too quickly. And there's always been this standard rule of 10% more specifically to running.
Yeah.
Don't increase your weekly mileage by more than 10%. And that number, there's no magic to that number. It's really just a number that came out of looking at ramp rates that people were undergoing and getting hurt. And again, a very high chance of getting hurt during a run training program. So 10% is pretty conservative for even just weekly increases.
It is and it's not, though, right? Like, think about it. If you're a 40-mile-a-week guy right now, 10% per week, next week you're doing 44 miles.
Right.
Next week you're doing 50 miles. The next week you're doing 55 miles. Like, you see what I'm saying? And then so in a month you may have went from 40 miles to 60 miles.
Yeah.
That's a pretty significant increase in run load. Right. So I think that the 10% per week is, I think it actually kind of needs to be maybe 10% in the beginning, and then tapering that as you gain volume.
Yeah.
And then I'll actually add another piece to this, is not just the volume, it's the intensity.
Yeah. Right.
Because you can stay the same volume and up your intensity and increase your training load significantly. And so we use metrics to do this, right? Like training scoring stress, intensity factor, RPE, which we've talked about. But I think that those all need to be pieces of the puzzle, and it can't just always be time or distance. Yeah. Because you could put a lot into some speed work and get injured really, with not much volume. Yeah.
No, and that's so what you're mentioning there with the training stress score. Now you're getting into how do you quantify the load, because we're talking 10% of mileage, or is it 10% of time, or or some combination of those. And so this again is the challenge of setting up a training program, is trying to figure out what that increase in load, which is an ambiguous term. We all know what it means, but it's actually hard to put your thumb on exactly what it means.
Yeah, and honestly, some of the metrics that we use, like that training scoring stress or whatever, all it really is looking at how much volume and intensity. Right. So you can increase volume, you can in training, you can increase volume, you can increase intensity. That's really the only things you have as far as the days of training. Right. Now we have the days of recovery where we're doing hopefully very little. So, I mean, and I've heard some podcasts with some high-level coaches that they're pretty simple with it. They just take the amount of time that somebody trains in minutes, and then they ask them on an RP scale, like, how hard was it? Right. Oh, that felt like a 7. Okay, 7 times 100 minutes, that's a score of 700. They put it into their Excel spreadsheet, and that was the load for the day. It's simple, but it really actually does work. And I know we all want to be able to use our Garmin watches or whatever watch you have, Apple Watch, and then put it into Training Peaks or put it into today's plan or whatever you use, and get the computer to do it for you. But it's, in my opinion, it's especially for the self-coached athlete, it's really easy to do something like take that RPE scale or perceived exertion scale and multiply it by the minutes you train.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting. I've heard you talk about that before, but I haven't really applied that yet.
So,
But I
and
like the concept.
that is probably more common. Like I got that from some soccer people because they didn't have the metrics,
Yeah.
right? So they would add, these were pretty high level soccer groups, and they would just take, keep a log. The coach would keep a log from the team, and he would literally, like, every kid after practice, like, well, how do you feel like your practice was? And there's no judging. I just want to know. Or he would ask them the next day, like, how did you feel training was yesterday, and how are you responding, and give them a number.
Mm-hmm.
And and many sports use something like this
Mm-hmm.
to help quantify it, because it's not as easy as, think about like basketball, for example. How do you know how many starts and stops you've had, and accelerations and decelerations? And yeah, there's ways to capture this data now, but the average like youth team or an adult playing basketball, they wouldn't have that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I like that. Yeah, and the basketball training, that is definitely harder. And but yeah, there are all these devices that we can wear now, and that's, we're seeing more algorithms coming out where they're trying to take in all these different measures to, understand what that load is. But I like that simplicity of RPE and time.
So let me give you an example of a couple different workouts, like running workouts, and how the load is kind of calculated. And this is just using pure metrics, right? So let's say you have two different track sessions. So track session one is you're going to run for 40 minutes at kind of a moderate pace. So not jogging, not racing, but kind of moderate pace. So you take your computer program or whatever, and it's going to say, okay, well, for 40 minutes you are at 70% intensity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's just say we're doing it the mathematical model of this. So 40 minutes at 70% intensity, you can multiply that. That's a score of 280. Okay, is that right? 7 times 4? Yeah. Okay. Make sure my math is good today. Well, let's take that same athlete and say, okay, you're going to do 4 200s, or sorry, let's make it more. Let's do 8 200s, all out, 10 out of 10 intensity, and then you're going to walk in between.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still going to last 40 minutes. Okay, so now the computer is going to say, okay, well, when I average out the time, you were only really active for about, like, you were active really hard for about, I don't know, 4 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to take that 4 minutes, and then it's going to average it out through that whole 40 minutes. And then when you're walking in between, and it's going to come out with a score that's way, way less.
Mm-hmm.
But those 200s can put a tremendous amount of load on your body. And so that's where the math in this stuff doesn't necessarily always come out so good.
Yeah.
Whereas if you talk to the athlete, or they talk to themselves, like, man, those 200s, man, I crushed it on those, and it was everything I had, and I couldn't do one more at that rate.
Mm-hmm.
They may rate today as like that was a 9 out of 10, and the other one they would have said it was a 7 out of 10. You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
Oftentimes it's difficult to use the metrics. I get frustrated sometimes. I get it, like, because I use Training Peaks, and I'll do like a session like that, and I'll get a TSS, or training scoring stress, that's like super low. Oh, you only got a score of 20, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, if I would have just went out and jogged for 40 minutes, I would have had a 40.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have felt way better. So, and I know I'm adding a lot to this, but I think that that's an important thing, is to use how you feel somehow into this as well.
Yeah. No, I like that. And I think that's, people need to understand how there is that subjective nature of training that is important. And this goes back to something we talked about a while ago. I mean, at the end of the day, your belief in your training program actually is a pretty big factor in terms of whether or not you're going to have a training response.
Yeah.
Well, let's do this. So we're sort of going through this 10% rule for training progression. How about let me throw another one out for you that I know we've talked about, but just curious how you want to attack this one. We always say when people are about to go for some type of training session, well, we don't always say it, but people will say, you got to warm up and you got to warm down.
I love that one.
So talk about warm up and warm down.
Warm up is critical.
Mm-hmm.
There is paper after paper, evidence after evidence that supports the fact that warming up makes performance better and decreases injury risk.
Mm-hmm.
The easiest way to think about it is the rubber band analogy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yep.
our bodies are rubber bands. There's lots of collagen and elastin in our bodies. And you take a rubber band that, that's been in your fridge and you pull it, it'll snap at a less, basically with less pull.
Mm-hmm.
If I warm it up in some nice warm water first and I pull it, it won't snap as easy. And our tendons, our joints, our ligaments, our muscles, all will work with that principle, plus our nervous system. So kind of waking up the nerves to a certain extent, getting them used to firing. These are all things that are really important. And, I'm a believer in that you should have a set warm up for your swim, for your bike, for your run. And even if it's literally just, before you get on the bike, you do 10 lunges, 10 squats, some leg swings, and then you go. Where we're actually, dynamically doing things to kind of turn your body on in a greater range of motion than you're going to do in the sport.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know we're not always great at doing it. I'm meeting my friends at 7, and oh man, I'm late. I got to pump up my tires. I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to do that. And you run up the house, and then, oh man, I got to go 5 miles in 15 minutes to get to where my friends are. I got to go hard to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're meeting your friends for a run, same kind of thing. And like, well, you don't want to be the odd person. I've been there. Meeting people for a run, and you show up at 5 for a run, and okay, it's 5 o'clock. Let's go.
Oh.
And nobody's warmed up.
Right.
And they are not, they don't do it. But ultimately, I believe warm up is critical. Now, on the other side, I believe cool down is BS.
Mm-hmm. Okay, why is that?
I can't find any good evidence to support that it does anything.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that being said, the evidence is, if there is any, maybe there's some psychological stuff as far as lowering your heart rate slowly, but I can't see any. Please, if someone has some really good peer-reviewed evidence to support this, I just don't see it. Now, and this is for endurance training. Okay, for sprinting in particular, there is some evidence for it, especially if you're going to do and the best example I can give is in swimming, when you're going to have to do another race, let's say in an hour, right? Where you have to, you're maximal, you maxed out your swim, and you got to cool down. It actually is important to actually move things through your body relatively in a controlled way. Bring your heart rate down slower. The stress hormones actually will come down at a more, judicious rate. So there's some evidence to that, but this is not what we're doing. We're not doing a 200-meter race and then an hour later having to do it again. So, I'll ask you the question, John. How many Ironmans have you done?
I'm somewhere around 18, I believe.
Okay, 18 Ironmans. How many times when you finish your Ironman have you seen people cool down?
Well, if you count lying down in the med tent.
Exactly, right? Like the toughest thing in our sport, well, I know there's longer Ironmans and stuff like that, but we don't see people cooling down. Same with the half Ironman. I've never seen somebody, I finished my half Ironman. I'm going to go for a jog just to loosen up. Come on. Right. And so I just, honestly, I wish there was some evidence to support it. I think that it's interesting. We do it. I think something cooling down for the sake of cooling down I don't see the evidence. Now, cooling down for the fact of getting a little bit of aerobic training. So if, let's say, you've been going, you're doing your intervals and you're going intense, not intense, intense, not intense, and your last thing is a 5-minute jog at the end, well, you're getting some aerobic training there. That's different than the purpose of actually cooling down.
Now, I generally agree with you,
Okay.
but when I swim, I always do a 100-yard, 100-meter cool down, which is mostly just getting on my back, working on range of motion of the shoulder, just sort of what you're talking about,
Yeah.
doing some breaststroke, getting some different direction, things like that. So
Yeah, but you're not talking about the metabolism.
no, that's right. That's right.
Adhere to. No, John, when I finish a run, I have a procedure of things that I do. Like I once again, I do some leg swings, I do some stretching, some dynamic movement because when I'm the warmest, that's the time to make those gains.
Yep.
I was more contending as far as the metabolic, you need to clear out your lactic acid, like that kind of cool down.
Yeah.
I, especially swimming, I think that you're doing exactly right. Like we've been in this one position for so long. Cycling is the same thing. When I get home from biking, if I'm not 100% devastated, which sometimes does happen, get on the foam roller, stretch it out, stretch out my hip flexors. No, I told you, but I don't consider that cooling down. I consider that basically body prep.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, for the next session.
Yeah.
All right. So we got a comment here on the live feed from Max. I think the physical exertion metric is wonderful, but don't you think it requires more self-aware athlete? Like with new athletes, having them associate an RPE to a heart rate creates a relationship between RPE to effort, etc. Which, okay, so this is perfect, but it leads to my next rule that a lot of our training should be done at conversational intensity.
Yes. Yeah, I think we discussed this off the air last time. I'm looking at 90 to 95% of my training this spring being conversational pace. And so that makes the RPE easy, right? Because I know it's going to be a 3 or below this time. And I think Max is right. But I would also contend that even with a new athlete, actually maybe even more with a new athlete, they know how hard they worked. Right. It's like, on a scale of 1 to 10 today, how hard was that session? And they may think it's an 8 and it's really a 2.
Yeah, right.
But there's still some wiggle room there.
That's why I like the conversational, because I think this speaks to Max's point, is that not all athletes are that self-aware. And so they may not be able to judge what is easy and when it's too hard. But if you're trying to talk and carry on a conversation, then that forces you to a slower pace on running or cycling or what have you. A little tough to do it during swimming, but
I'd also say that especially with people that are getting into endurance sports, one of the biggest mistakes, right, is and Max is right, and having that awareness, but it's really hard to have that awareness or even to have conversational pace running when you can't do it.
Yeah, right.
When you literally, the second you go from walking to jogging and you go past the aerobic threshold and you actually can't, the slowest jog, you can't catch your breath. That's a difficult thing. And once again, that takes a lot of persuading and a lot of coaching and a lot of time to get that person to that point. So I think Max is right on, with figuring those things out for new people. Yeah.
All right. So my next rule that we talk about quite a bit, specificity of training. And we always say, if you want to be a good runner, you got to run. If you want to be a good biker, you got to bike. If you want to be a good swimmer, you got to swim. If you want to be a good triathlete, what do you do?
Weight train and eat well. No, John, once again, you're spot on. Like you have to do it, right? It's amazing what volume will do. Yeah. Right. And this is what progression is increasing the volume and / the intensity, but really the volume. And if I was just to take any person off the street and say, hey, you know what we're going to do is we're going to get you on a bike. And in the next 2 weeks, you're going to ride this bike, even an indoor bike. You're going to ride it 6 times.
Mm-hmm.
After the 6th time, they'll be more efficient. They'll be better than they were. Even if there was not, like, you didn't even have to give them a plan,
Mm-hmm.
right? They become their neuromuscular system becomes more efficient. Your body figures it out.
Mm-hmm.
And figures out how to be efficient. And the number one stimulus for your body figuring it out is to do it.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's that's obviously piece one. Now, after a while, just doing it's not enough. Like, actually doing it right helps, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked at length about swimming, because that's the one where, you know, obviously, you know, the technique in doing it right is probably the most important.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, you know, how do we tie that into swimming, John, in your opinion?
Well, I think that's the beauty of triathlon, is that we do have this issue of crossover effect. So if we can build our engine swimming, then we won't need to run as many miles. And same thing with cycling. If you can build your engine cycling, then you don't need to run as many miles, which will reduce your risk for overuse injury. So the beauty, I think, of triathlon is your specificity can be fitness,
Yeah.
but you still need to swim, bike, and run a certain amount to get that skill set. And swimming is obviously a big skill set. And if you're not a great swimmer, then you get your fitness from cycling or maybe running, and then work on your skill set in swimming, and get that specific swim stroke down so you can swim faster.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think we did talk about this. There was that pro cyclist that ran the Tom Pidcock, right? He ran that 14-minute 5K or 13 something 5K this summer, and he wasn't a runner, but he actually won the gold medal in the mountain biking. He also was in the Tour de France. Like, the guy's amazing, right?
Right.
Well, you don't have to be very specific for short. Specificity doesn't matter for short events.
Yeah.
But when we go longer, it becomes really important, because
Mm-hmm.
that's going to create efficiency.
That's right. And then durability.
Durability and efficiency. And that's ultimately, with our volume, what we're trying to do. And if you do enough volume, you're going to get those things along with the aerobic.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's the beauty of this. It happens together.
Right. Okay. So let me see if you've heard this one. I have not, but I came across it. If something hurts for 2 days, take 2 days off. Have you heard that?
Oh, okay. So yes.
All right.
It depends on how much it hurts.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I like that. Yeah.
Right? If every time you step down and it feels like someone's stabbing you in the shin with a needle, 2 days might not be enough.
Right? Yeah.
If every time, let's say you're a runner, for example, and when you run, your shoulder hurts.
Yeah.
Is 2 days off going to help your shoulder? Maybe not. And the thing, I love these rules, because in general they work. There's to every rule there's an exception. I will tell you this though, and this is something that I need to be smarter with personally, is if you're hurting, especially, well, in any of these sports, swim, bike, or run, if after 5 to 10 minutes it's still hurting, stop.
Yeah, right.
Like, I get it, sometimes you're sore from the last session, and my hamstring's just a little bit sore, and I think if I keep going, it's going to get better, and it might get better. But if you still feel it, you gotta stop.
Yeah.
And then take 2 days off. And I'm not saying you don't feel it for 2 days. I'm saying, like, that is, and I'm telling you, that is so hard for triathletes to do.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I'll just go easy tomorrow instead. Or my hamstring's bothering me. I'll just, I'll swim.
Yeah.
I'll bike instead. I'm notorious for it, right? Like, I've had lots of injuries and calf injuries, and so all my calf hurts when I run. So I'll just bike. Well, what is your calf doing when you're biking? It is an isometric contraction literally the entire time. Am I having the same loading? No, but would it be better if I did something else? And and the other thing I'll say here, and we've talked about this before, is when you do start to feel those pains, some time off is good, but not too much time. I like the 2-day principle. Like 2 days off is good. Then it's time to actually get things moving and actually start the healing process. Because within 2 days, you're out of we call it the inflammatory phase usually. But no, John, I love that one, by the way, that you brought that one up.
Yeah, no, I came across that, and yeah, but it is hard. But I think, like you, I'm the same way. That if you're running and you're limping or there's a sharp pain, you got to stop.
Yeah.
You can't walk it back. And unfortunately, I've had that where I've been in the middle of a run and, I've had that calf attack and you have to stop. And
You have to stop.
It's hard. And you gotta
it's
call for a
especially hard
ride
because we're crazy, right? Because we're like
No.
in our minds, oh, I'm supposed to run 10 miles today.
That's right.
And I gotta start this. I gotta start saying, I need at least, I don't know, once a month to have a failed run or a failed bike or a failed swim. Like that's how I know that I'm actually doing good, is I need to be able to say, you know what, my shoulder is really hurting right now. I'm only 1,500 in and I know I plan on doing 3,000 today.
Yep.
But to have the discipline to say, you know what, no. And I'll fully admit to you and to everyone that listens that is one of my issues.
Yeah.
Like, because I have it in my mind that I'm running this far, I'm biking this far, I'm swimming this far. And the only person that I'm letting down is myself if I don't do it, because I'm the only one that knows, right? Like I don't have a coach. I just, I coach myself, and it's like, well, you know what? You're a failure if if I walk home from a run or I call my wife to come pick me up, I'm a failure. But I feel the same. If I was supposed to run 10 miles and I run 9, I'm a failure. And I have to get past that. That's there we go. I haven't had a New Year's resolution yet. My New Year's resolution is to have at least 2 failed trainings a month. There we go. I'm writing it down.
Yeah. I like
2 per month.
Yeah.
And that will be the success. Because I have my goal to do that. And so then, when I don't do it, it's like, I'm successful.
Okay, hold on. I got a comment here, and it's from. I saw a comment from Bob, and then it went away, and it had to do with sore muscles versus sore joints, and I can't see it right now, so it's disappeared on me. But and I think that is a good distinction too about, is the pain in the muscle or is the pain in the joint? And I think those lead you down different paths for what to do.
But I will also say, and this is important, and it's really important for people that aren't really in the industry of like the healthcare industry, is that there's a lot of referred pain.
Yeah. And explain what referred pain is for people.
So referred pain would be, okay, like, your knee joint has arthritis in it. And you actually feel it in your quadricep, or you feel it in your calf. And, or I guess the easiest one for people is you're having a heart attack. Where's the pain supposed to be?
Shoulder.
The shoulder, right?
Yeah.
That's referred pain, but our joints can have referred pain as well. So it's somewhat difficult to say. But if you knew for sure, that's my calf. Yeah. It's not referred from somewhere else. It potentially is different, but I'll still say, like, either way, if you start training and you get to a certain point where things are hurting, you need to stop.
Yep.
And you have to know the difference between, and I guess this is the one that maybe Bob's kind of getting at too, is the difference between injury pain and soreness.
Yeah. Right.
Because I think we've all been there on a long run, long bike, long swim, where, oh man, my legs they're done. They're sore. Like, that's a different thing than every time I push down on the pedal or every step I take, I get a shooting pain.
And that soreness will go away with a train when you start training, or a run or a bike or what have you. And if that pain goes away, then you're okay.
Yeah.
And it doesn't go away.
And soreness near the end of a session, especially if you're going a little bit longer than you or harder than you normally have gone, is an okay thing.
Yep.
But I would say it's when, when you stress that piece of the body. So for example, running, like when you land or when you push off, that one little thing, it causes that short, sharp pain, I guess is the best way to put it. That's a good sign you need to stop.
Yep.
Whereas if it's like, and you step down, it's like, oh, that's sore. That's a different thing. Because I get, like, especially on the longer rides, I've noticed it. Like, when you start getting like 80, 90 miles, your legs start to get pretty dang sore.
Yeah.
And it's like, but it's not, it's a different feeling. And it's sometimes it's hard to quantify.
No, those, if it's a sharp pain that happens suddenly, okay, that's pay attention.
Yeah.
All right.
The other one is if you can change something and make the pain go away, it's not a good thing.
Okay. I like that too.
Because that's not just general soreness.
That's right. Right.
So, if your foot is hurting, it's like, well, I'm just running I'll run on the outside of my feet. Oh, that feels better. That's not a soreness.
And I think this is an important point that we've said before, but I think it's good to reinforce is biking should not be painful. Running should not be painful. Swimming should not be painful. I mean, if sharp pains or pains, in your seat or whatever, hands, you should not have pains.
And I'll add a piece until it's been diagnosed properly.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So I get it. Like, there are going to be people that, especially, as you get older, you get some degenerative joint disease and some arthritis, and, maybe you've had a surgery or something like that. And, you've accepted the fact that it's going to hurt, and you've talked to your doctor, and you guys have come up with this thing that's, it's going to hurt, but I want to keep doing this. I'm not doing more damage by doing it. Then that's okay. Right. Like, I'll give you another example, like where pain is okay. Right. I lost my toenail in a race.
Yeah. Right.
And it freaking hurt every time I stepped down. It hurt. And I knew it's my toenail and it's going to fall off. And, and it's like, just suck it up. And and John, I'm the worst, right? We talked about it. I did a half marathon with a dislocated shoulder. So
yeah, right. Paying the price too. Okay. Let me get a couple more in here. The longer the race, the slower the training pace. I think we've sort of talked about this.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
I mean, that's that.
I kind of disagree, because like we talked about Blumenfeld and Eden and doing an Olympic distance and an Ironman and they're I don't.
Yeah, but I will also try to convince you that you agree, because we've been talking about that conversational pace, or doing a bike ride at 150 watts versus 200 watts.
Yeah.
There's.
But I don't think it's dictated on the race you're going to do.
Yeah. But I think I think the point of this rule is you've got to have consistent, sustainable training.
But I would contend with anything, right? Yeah. If my goal this year was to go to the U.S. Sprint Nationals, would I do more speed work than if I was going to the Ironman World Championship?
Right.
And yes, but only in the the last maybe 6 weeks of the training block. Because aerobic development is the key to all of this, right? All of this is aerobic, right? Very little of this is truly anaerobic. This is,
right. That's right.
We talked about this many times. If I'm gonna do a sprint race and it's gonna last an hour, that's aerobic. I can't be anaerobic for an hour. So it's a good, but yes and no. How about on that one?
You gotta have a place to build the volume, but you do need to have some of that high intensity work. Okay, this is sort of a fun one. These are in no particular order. This one probably doesn't really fit what we're talking about, but nothing new on race day. Yeah. And I guess I have this down because you're training to prep for a race. And so you do want to do as much as you can in training to prepare yourself for an event. And that's all the little things that goes in too. But
If we're speaking specifically about training, right?
I think maybe we need to do that because otherwise there's a lot of things that we do new on race day that we don't
Yeah,
always talk
because of course, right? Like number one new thing on a race day for an Ironman is you do an Ironman,
about. Yeah, that's right.
right? Because you don't train
Yeah,
an Ironman, do you?
no,
And
not.
same with the 70.3. It's not like you're like, you know what I'm going to do is 2 weeks before I'm going to do a 70.3 at race pace. So then I can go do it again in 2 weeks. So it's always new on race day
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to training.
Yeah,
Now, that being said, I think what we're getting at in this, and we're talking about load management, is progressive loading,
right.
where we become, in my opinion, we become more specific to the race we want to do as we get
Mhm.
closer to the race.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Right.
good.
And so it's not like it's all new, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like for a 70.3, for example, I'll do some like bike intervals or run intervals at race pace,
Mm-hmm.
maybe 4 weeks before, 3 weeks before, but I'm not doing 13-mile run at race pace. I might do 6 times 1,000 at race, 1,000 meters at race pace. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like the pace isn't new,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not going to do it 13 miles at full race pace.
I like it. All right. So, and I've got stories of a particular friend, and if she's watching, she knows
You know
who
who
she
she is?
is. She always does something new on race day.
It's her
That's
thing.
her thing. That's right. So then it's not new. So you're always doing a new
I
pair of goggles, a new
love it.
something, and so yeah. So now you're adapting to that. But it is funny, when I go to races and I see people in the race kit for that race, meaning they just bought it and they wore it on that day, and I always find that interesting because I always like to make sure all my gear has been tested out, and I know how it's going to feel, and what have you. But it's an interesting rule that we break commonly. Okay, we're almost out of.
I want to be really quick devil's advocate. What if they buy one at every race they do and they do the same race and it's the same
That's
brand? And it's just a new one. They're used to that. So
that's right. Well, and sometimes you get used to a brand, and so if you know it's this brand X that does the suit, then
yep.
it could be any suit. It's the brand that how
Yep.
it's made. All right, just a couple of fun ones to end up on. Uh, well, maybe we'll end on this. Train your gut.
Oh, did you read the book? The
Which one?
Athlete's Gut, the one we
No, I got to get that still. Yeah, I got to get that.
So for those of you that are listening, it's a great book. Especially if you've had, and most triathletes have had some kind of GI issue.
Mm-hmm.
John, I'm such a big fan of this.
Yeah.
For many reasons. You know, I think proper fueling while training is something that triathletes struggle with,
Mm-hmm.
because, and I've fallen victim to it too. And this is my chance to lose some weight.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to do a 5-hour bike ride. And for the first 2 hours, well, I'm not really going to eat anything because I'm not going to be hungry. And then I'm just going to eat enough to not be hungry.
Yeah.
And you get into these calorie debt situations.
Yeah.
And I actually think that it's training your gut not to be able to process.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you really should be training your gut while you're exercising. Like, even in when you're running, in an Ironman, John, how many gels or how many times will you eat during the run?
Yeah. Well, me?
Yeah, you. Well,
Much.
so if you had no gastrointestinal issues, how many times would
Yeah.
you like to actually ingest calories?
Yeah, you try to sustain calories as much as you can without having any GI issues. But I unfortunately am notorious for having problems on the run. So,
but very few runners will, when they go out for their long run, take more than maybe 2 gels.
yeah. Well, let's go back in the history of marathons. Back in the early 1900s,
when they were having nothing.
they didn't have any aid stations, and it was more of a sort of a cool thing to do a marathon without even taking fluids. So it's amazing how things have changed so much from the early 1900s to where we are now, to where we expect aid stations every mile or every mile and a half in a marathon or iron distance event. So
Yeah.
But yeah, train your gut. That you got to. I think the point of it is you are thinking about your nutrition during your training, and you're trying to prep for your race day. And low energy availability is not the best way to train your gut.
Well, and in general, even like the right? So like
Yeah.
if you're gonna for your race day, you're gonna have this for breakfast, right?
Mm-hmm.
You determine that, hey, every time I race, I'm good on a peanut butter and jelly bagel
Yeah.
and a yogurt or whatever you have, right? But if you only do that 3 or 4 times a year,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right.
one day it's gonna backfire on you,
Yeah.
right? That should be, if your Sunday morning long ride is, you do that every Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
you should probably try and at least get close to what you're going to do on race day. Your body will be happy with that.
Well, one of our avid listeners, Rick, he talks about having ice cream on race morning, and I'm like, now that's the diet I need for my training days. So, got to train your gut with ice cream before.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I always have ice cream afterwards, so that's
Yeah, yeah.
I'm doing it wrong.
Me too. Well, we're covering a lot of different grounds. I think maybe
Yep.
we need to sum it up in terms of training progression rules. Is I don't think either of us would shy away from saying the number one rule is be consistent.
Consistent and I think number two is yeah, no big gains in anything.
Mm-hmm.
Everything should be incremental.
Yep.
Wherever you are right now and wherever you want to get to, make it realistic and make it
Mm-hmm.
incremental gains. And I got to be honest, every single time I've been injured, it's been from increased load too fast.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
I can look back at the years of training in my metrics, and it's with always.
Mm-hmm.
And and every time I get to that point, I'm like, oh man, I really regret the last 2 weeks of that training cycle. Like I was stupid. I should have took a week off. I was feeling it, and I just kept pushing through because my fitness was getting better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's and fitness is man, it's nasty because you get fit and you're like, oh man, I could do this. I could ride for 100 miles and then go for a 5-mile run afterwards because I can. And it feels like I've accomplished a whole lot. It's a slippery slope.
Yep, it is. And I think the other part that we both really have talked a lot about is the training has to fit into your regular lifestyle. Right? That is so important. So it's not putting added stress on you, on your family, your friends, or even distracting too much from work. Although it's actually a good distraction from work.
It's a good distraction. Exactly.
That balance. All right. Well, we covered a lot of ground in 2 weeks, and I know that we're really still sort of scratching the surface. There's lots of other rules that people follow or have heard. So maybe we'll come back and pick up on this again.
Yeah, awesome. And thanks for the comments, everybody. That was great.
Yeah, those were good. Excellent. All right. Well, hey, have a good weekend training.
Yeah, you too. Stay out of trouble, okay?
Yeah. Don't do too much.
I'm gonna try not to.
Right.
Just a little bit of indoor riding and a swim. That's it.
All right. Talk soon.
Okay, bye-bye.